Second here.
Sorry, I'm pressing the record button. All right,
yeah.
Recording. All right, I got it.
So
all right, we're live.
You just want to count it down and let
Three,
it drip?
2, 1, and we're live. What's up, Mark?
Hey, how's it going, man?
It's going pretty well.
Yeah, it's been a fucking doozy of a week for me. School is fucking kicking me right in the ass. I haven't been paying too much attention to the world, except sort of a continuation of the things we talked about last week, where there's still a lot of people that are kind of in an uproar over several different problems, and I think we've been seeing some, in minor ways, we've been seeing some things be not acknowledged. We've been seeing some things be acknowledged. For example, I've seen several police departments being not defunded, but their funding cut. And I also saw a couple places, like Denver, for one, voted like unanimously to take police out of public schools.
Right. So we're seeing a lot of action and probably not necessarily a lot of thought into these policies. I know that some of the things that I've seen, like circulating the internet, is like defund police. Nobody's really unpacking what they mean by that. I've been trying to go in and look like what exactly like this movement is happening. Like obviously, I think a large part of the problem that we're seeing is that we have everyday people just getting into politics, and they think they're experts, but they're really not. These issues are very, very, very complicated. And like, I guess like to draw a parallel to like the kind of like to something random, but I think it might be useful, is to like the idea of the stock market. And when a bubble happens, when the prices get overinflated, it's because the everyday person is rushing to buy Amazon. So like grandma from up the street who doesn't know nothing about Amazon, the stock market, is entering the market and talking about Amazon. And so like, tying that back into politics, that's exactly what we're seeing. Everybody's talking about this, and we're not very good at it. Like what I'm saying is like, if you say something that disagrees with my current political view or whatever the popular narrative is, it's an attack on me as an individual. And I think that that's what we're kind of seeing play out in a larger scale here in the United States. And it has started to be a problem. We kind of need to have more leadership who's willing to take this problem seriously. So,
yeah. Well, I think the thing is that it on a leadership scale and on a just regular person scale, the discourse is just not happening. There's a lot of like assertions going on, and like you said, people seem to take anything that is a challenge to their currently held beliefs as an actual attack on them or what they believe in or what they stand for, instead of looking at things as like, well, okay, you think this, I think here's a problem with that thought, which is not necessarily to say that the entire thing is wrong or that there isn't some element of truth in whatever you believe or whatever you're saying, but merely, I'm not sure that it's 100% correct. So let's try and get to the bottom of whatever it is that you think or believe, so we can find what is the actual truth in what you believe, and then build on that, instead of saying, okay, well, I have this idea, so this overarching theme must be what the truth really, really is, when in a lot of cases, that's not the case, especially if you look at things like, discussions in economics between, people who think that we need to be communist or people who think that we need to be pure capitalist. And there's not really like much discussion going. Yeah, not a middle ground. I think it's easy to poke holes in both of them. Socialism, capitalism, communism. It's so easy to poke holes in them. What's not as easy is to look for their strengths and then address the holes without erasing the strengths, right? Without saying, well, the strengths don't matter because here's this hole. A good example of that is like when people say that, free market capitalism encourages greediness, and because of that, we need to move to pure socialism or communism. And it's like, well, okay, yes, there is greediness can definitely be encouraged by free market capitalism. However, free market capitalism also allows the market to regulate itself. It allows for more, well-regulated competition when it's being monitored, which is a thing that the free market capitalists do not want. They, I don't want to be regulated in any way because that's socialism or that's communism. Well, not necessarily. You can be You can have some sort of middle ground between the two. And I think the general problem here is that nobody really feels like they want to have a discussion about compromise, because I think a lot of people see compromise as defeat instead of seeing it as progress. And if you look at, like business, right? The best kind of business is where everybody gets a bigger piece of the pie. Instead of saying, well, I'm going to sell you the pie for some outrageous price and you're going to get the pie, but you're also going to be broke, or saying, well, you should just give me the pie, in which case the person who supplied it is screwed.
But nobody wants to make the pie. Yeah, I should just get the free pie, but nobody wants to make it. Now that is an excellent point, and it's not. We're not having a real serious conversation about this at all. Everybody's just jumping to conclusions, and so like if you're supporting the left, like you're, an advocate of socialism these days. And, the left doesn't define their terms either. So when they use democratic socialism or socialism, I get a little bit worried because I don't know what they mean. It could mean a lot of things. It could be, socialism by definition would be to take over the means of production. Just that, a Soviet style taking over the means of production, where we're going to take over Amazon, take over Ford, Chevy, all of these companies, and take it. But I think like one of the things that is so interesting is like how everybody's advocating for socialism here in the United States, but what they don't understand is like we don't produce anything. So like the taking over the means of production side of the socialist theory can't happen when we don't produce anything. Like we're a consumer economy. Most of our economy is made up by going, to restaurants or
services.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all, like I guess in a Wolf of Wall Street, it's all a fugazi, a wazi, a woozy. It's not necessarily real. And I think that's what's happening right now, like this wealth inequality that is driving resentment in every community, not just the Black community, not just the Latino community, every community. There is an element of class struggle here, where you have the have-nots looking to the rich billionaires of the world, and they're like, wow, you have a mansion and your company makes a lot of money. You could clearly pay your people more, which is true. They can pay their people more, but at the same time, they're struggling in the system. So like we have to find a happy ground. I think like there are some elements of socialism that are worth considering. Like I don't think controlling an entire economy is centrally planned economy. I think that idea has been debunked a long time ago. With the fall of the Soviet Union, because that's what happened to them, that they were unable to have accurate pricing controls with the free market. And so like we need the free market, but we also need to fix this wealth inequality gap. And so like the only way to really do that is for us, I guess from a Marxist critique, is to have like we would be exploiting somebody of their labor. So like if you look to like sending the corporation sending their business overseas, like the China, a Marxist critique would be like, well, they're exploiting them of their labor, so because they can produce it for much less and give us the products. And that's what our current economy kind of relies on, is for us to be able to have cheap labor so we could have the goods that we want. To counter that argument, the free market capitalists would make the argument saying, even though like China's producing this for much less of a price, it's all based on free will. So each party is better off because they wouldn't enter this service if it wasn't worthwhile. If it wasn't in their best interest, they wouldn't be working. So I understand both sides of the argument. I
Well,
mean, that's at least how they justify it. You know, you could deconstruct that however you want. But the larger point is that we need to find a way to employ all of these people here in the United States that want to work like that. I think a real problem that we're seeing is our generation, the millennial generation, or a lot of them went to the university, and now they're graduating with tons of debt, and they are not necessarily employable. And it's a very competitive job market, and we need to find ways and create new jobs. And I think like one of the things that we touched on last time, which was creating some type of development campaign or organization here in the United States, kind of like that would be modeled off of the military, where you could have this element of exploiting labor, as you would say, but it's not exploiting labor. So you would be paying them for cheap labor, like in the military, but you would be getting a product, a service where we are going to continue industrializing as a nation, and you're going to be able to make everybody's lives better off by being able to have, better housing, by having more products, by having more productivity for everybody. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
So, kind of touched on a lot of things here. I'll start with this. I think a lot of people see the current system as an exploitation, not because there is not work. Unemployment in America is pretty consistent, and it's not necessarily that nobody can work. It's, you may be working in some sort of a service job or whatever. There's jobs. People are working. And it's easy to say, from the free market capitalist sense that, okay, well, there's free will. You chose to work for this amount, right? But on the other hand, there is this argument, which is there are only so many jobs. I need to feed myself. So if all of these large corporations, which as the world is progressing, there are more and more large corporations and less small businesses, right?
Right.
And because a lot of these large corporations operate on the same principles, it's hard for you to find a job that's fair paying, because if you say, well, I'm not going to work for anyone who doesn't pay me fairly, suddenly the job market becomes very, very small, right? And you still got to eat. You still got to pay your rent. You still got to pay for all this shit, which is also, interestingly enough, largely controlled by large corporations, right? So it's like, well, I need to survive. I need to make money to survive. And the only options for me to do that are these large corporations that don't give me a fair wage compared to what they could be giving me. Right. So it's a bit like you're threatened with starvation if you don't work in the system that's already here, right? So, and then the other thing that I was thinking of that you kind of touched on briefly is bundled belief systems, which is to say that if you believe X, you must also believe Y. And I think that's a huge part of the problem as well, because you can believe that there is, wealth inequality and not believe that the system we have is 100% to blame. I think very much it's partly to blame. I think a lack of regulation on the way that large corporations do business is also partly to blame. I think profit sharing from corporations to employees is just almost non-existent. It seems to me much more that corporations are profit sharing.
We need to find a more equitable way to share up the profits for everybody.
Oh yeah, right. And I think there's some way to do that.
And just to bring up, to make it relevant to the conversation, the current way that the more progressive types are advocating for is for the $15 minimum wage, which is, it seems very nice in theory, but like you just brought up the idea of profit sharing. And so like if you take like a company like McDonald's, they make a lot of profit. But if you're only getting $15 minimum wage, like sure, obviously McDonald's can afford it. Like that's not a big deal. But if you altered your policy to be like, if we're doing it on a basis of profit sharing, now maybe when McDonald's is doing well, those employees are going to do well in the good times. So now they may not be limited to $15 an hour. Maybe their lowest employees get paid $18 an hour, which I think would be a much better policy. And it would shift with the times, good times and bad times. And so like I think that there has to be a new way of rethinking everything, the way that our entire economy and the United States is currently structured, because just saying something that like, hey, putting a price control, saying, hey, I want this to be $15 minimum wage, that does nothing. Like on average, like in New York City, which I think it's like $15 minimum wage. If you want to go to lunch, get lunch, it's going to cost around $15, which means like, when minimum wage was like $8 an hour, I would assume that lunch was probably around $8. So it still costs you an hour's worth of your labor. It's just we think we're making it better. So it's a trick on the common man to say like, hey, we are paying you more on paper, but in reality, you're not getting your real world wages the same. So a lot of things have to change, or at least consider new ways of doing it.
I don't think it's even new. I think it's just something that we've drifted away from. Think about like the Christmas bonus, right? The Christmas bonus traditionally was a profit share. It was the end of the year, and the company was saying, okay, we made this much money, here's your slice. But I think what's happened is that slice has been shifted to shareholders, right? In terms of dividends. So the shareholders are now the people who are getting paid for the work of the employees, right? So if you look at it that way, it really starts to fall apart, because if you're an employee, what's your incentive to actually want to work hard and do your job well if you're not getting a piece of the pie that the company's making, right? The only people who are getting that slice of the pie is, probably a board of executives who have large shareholdings in the corporation, and then a bunch of other shareholders on the outside. Right. So the company's not taking care of the actual employees. Like at the heart of it, the company is not taking care of its employees. It's not a team structure. It's we're utilizing you to produce funding that we are dispersing to shareholders. Now, if the employees were all equal shareholders, or at least shareholders to some extent that it actually made a difference in the company, then it would be different, right? But I think a lot of employees can't afford to be a shareholder in the company. Think about Amazon, right? If you are working in a warehouse for Amazon and you're packaging stuff up and sending it out the door, working in a warehouse, I don't know what the wages are in there. I don't think they're that high, but I can almost guarantee you that if you're working in a warehouse in Amazon, you are not able to afford Amazon stock, right? How much is Amazon stock at right now?
Am I looking at this correctly? It is $2,500.
Exactly.
That is
right.
Insane.
So are you telling me that the average warehouse worker
that is insane.
can just be laying down money to buy stock in the company that they work for and receive a dividend that's worth anything? Probably not.
Right.
I mean, I had stock in NVIDIA, right? And I had like 15 shares, which, it's not a lot, right? But at the end of the day, I looked at my dividend, right? Then they're like, here's a dividend for you for believing in our company.
Thanks for
16 cents.
For helping out. Yeah.
16 cents.
I think that's
the
investment,
good point. The investment to profit ratio, as for me, the shareholder, was like nothing, right? Which I don't mind, because I'm taking a gamble on the company and saying, I think you're going to do well. I believe in you.
Right.
But I think that if you're an employee of these companies, you should have some stock in that company. Like if you're an employee, why doesn't Amazon give you stock and to say, look, you're one of us, you're fighting the same fight that we are. Here's your stock. Here's your part of the company. So that if the company does well, you're doing well, or
a different type, maybe issue a different type of dividend to them that goes above actual investors, because they're the real investors. They're investing in the company with their time and their labor. So that does make a lot of sense. Just on the surface, without like thinking about this too deeply, like, I would think that, putting some type of restrictions on, these corporations on like when can they issue a dividend? Can Walmart issue their dividend if they're tap their employees on food stamps? I don't think so. I don't consider that to be a healthy company.
No, that's bullshit.
Right.
That's literally just exploiting your company.
Right. Well, there's an economic incentive to do it, and so this is what like, I understand where like the socialist critiques are coming from, because they're like, our whole capitalist system is failing around us. And it's just like, sure, you are correct. Like, that is a system of failing, but it doesn't mean that we can't fix it. And there are, you know, some aspects, like we could fix a lot of these things, and it's not worth tearing down. It's like we've come too far as a society to just you know, flip the monopoly board over and say like, hey, we're going to start over, because that, you know, historically gets pretty violent, apparently.
Well, and it doesn't, you don't recover very quickly
Yeah,
either.
and you don't recover very quickly, and so that would make everybody worse off. And then what would probably end up happening is so there would be a new oppressor, you know, like right now, like we're seeing is like this idea of white privilege, and the white man has oppressed us. And you know, there's a lot of truth to that. But like at the same time, like we're a new generation, you know, like me and you, like I'm 27 years old. Like obviously, like we have to fix the sins of our grandfathers. That's basically what it is. And history will show, like history is very fucked up, and like we got to fix it. And we're not angels, like, you know what I mean? Like we're not perfect people. And matter of fact, like we are very far from perfect. Like humanity has done some horrible things to each other, and we continue to do some horrible things. Like just the other day, one of my friends, she's very Christian, and she was telling me a story of how she went you know, to go have lunch with some of her Christian friends. And everybody is you know, talking about this whole George Floyd incident, so that naturally came up, like, what do you think about this? And she, you know, it came up with this discussion of about like, well, the Black Lives Matter versus the All Lives Matter. And it's like, you know, that starts becoming a debate. Well, you know, all lives matter, well, Black Lives Matter. And it's just like, are we really arguing about this? Like, is that really like the level of intellectual debate that we as a society are having? Is that where we want to draw our line for that, you know, to fight about this? Because like that's kind of ridiculous. And like it's crazy, because like these were people who grew up in the church together, and like they know that they supposedly both come from like humble beginnings and are good, you know, have a good grounding on the same belief system. But yet something happened. This ideological groupthink is taking them over to behave in a certain hostile way, where they, you know, and I think that's happening on a large scale. Like we're not very good at, like we as peoples are not very good at talking about politics, and we're, you know, whether it's because
or
we're
just belief systems,
or and belief systems, and everybody has an opinion. And I think like what we need to do is everybody needs to take a break, and like that would really show like we're taking this problem seriously. Because if we don't want to make things worse, it's very easy to make things worse. And you know, we got to, if we really want to take this problem seriously, then like we would really think about it. And we're not going to cure, you know, 300 years of sin, you know, in a day or with one policy. And so like if we really want to take it seriously, like I think like what should happen is there should be like some type of committee of like where experts come in and we actually debate everything. Because like defunding the police, maybe that's not the right solution. Maybe, I don't know. Like we're not getting a lot of information on what do you mean by defunding the police. Like I know that there are some other interpretations where I've heard like, oh, defunding the police isn't actually what you think it means. It means like we want more community organizing and a different way of thinking about a police force. I understand that, but like you like words matter. Words matter. So when you say like defund the police, like what is the common person going to think? Well, shoot, like you're going to just get rid of all of their funding, take them off the street, and now we're just going to live without police. And that's scary to a lot of people. And, you know, and if you say like, hey, that's scary, well, now you're going to have one of these like crazy people like you don't care about Black people. And it's like, that's not true. Like we do care. Like everybody cares. Like we're trying to figure out this problem. And it's very complicated, and nobody's helping out by calling each other the devil. You know, if you really care, like we would be making the assumption that we're all coming from the same humble beginnings and trying to solve this. And I'm not knocking down the fact that there are racists here in America, because there are, and racists exist in every, you know, race, color, creed, not just white people. You know, there's there's racism between everyone. And, like their definition of I'm using of race is when you think one race is inferior to another. So and I also think that that term just in general is being overused, and people have they don't know how to use a specific word to be able to identify what exactly it is they're talking about, and so that they're very lazy and they just naturally go to talking about racism, that it's racist, and it's like, sure, maybe it's not racism, maybe it's mean, maybe it's they're not empathetic, maybe it's a lot of other things, other words, but it might not, just because somebody just agrees with you doesn't make them a racist. They might just be seeing something from a completely different angle, and
Well, I think what that kind of stems from is this sort of belief that we have going on right now, which is basically, if you're not with us, you're against us. And I think that you can see that in American politics every day. It's, if you're not with us, you're against us. Well, you don't believe in something that I as a conservative, or I as a liberal, or I as a Republican, or I as a Democrat believe, then clearly you're my enemy. And this goes back to bundled belief systems, right? Having to bundle together ideas that you agree with in order to appease other people, instead of having a discussion about the individual issues, which may or may not be related. And if they are related, to what degree? And does believing one thing actually imply that you believe, next thing, whatever that may be? Because I think in a lot of cases, no, it does not. But I think what you're saying, which is I have observed very much, is that people are very liberal with their usage of particular words, and very liberal with their labeling of things, right? So if you say, well, I don't want the police to go away, well, then you're a racist, because that belief system is bundled, right? Right now, it's in a bundle where if you believe that Black Lives Matter, then the police are bad, is what a lot of people are thinking. And I'm not saying that's what everyone says or what everyone believes or anything like that, but there's a lot of it going around. One of the things that I've seen circulating around the internet quite a lot is all cops are bad. And it's an interesting sentiment, right? There is, obviously it came from something, right? I am a firm believer that there is an element of truth in most things that people say. Do I think all cops are bad? No. I think that's just false. I think, yeah, there's a lot of cops that are pretty bad. And I think there's a lot of practices in the police force that are pretty bad. And I think that the training for our police officers is quite lackluster, and the requirements to be a police officer, and the investigative procedure for looking into something that has occurred between a police officer and a civilian is completely lacking, if not non-existent. But that doesn't mean that all cops are bad. And I think there's way too much of that going around, where it's, you have to believe everything that I believe, or you believe nothing I believe, which is also, that's the heart of the problem, is that that's not going to produce results. What that is tyranny.
Yes.
That is saying, you believe everything I believe, or else, period. Right? And I don't want to live in a society where that is the status quo. I don't want to live in a place where it's, you believe everything I believe, or else. And I don't want to live somewhere where people can say, you can't think X, right?
Yes.
So a good example of that is, I saw something this week that said, you can't just think racist thoughts, or you can't just think homophobic thoughts or transphobic thoughts, or it's not an opinion. You aren't allowed to do that. And that's obviously, that's not what it said verbatim, but that was pretty close. And I agreed with the sentiment of what they were getting at. I agreed. Look, I don't want to live in a world with racism. I don't want to live in a world with hatred. I don't want to live in a world where people cannot just be whoever they are. I don't want to live in that world. But I disagree with the way they're going about it, which is saying you're not allowed to think this. Because once you have a thought police in whatever society, I feel like society will start to crumble. And the reason I think that is because if you can't freely talk about what you think or what you believe, what that's going to do is cause you to push that down, and it's only going to come out when you're around other people who believe the same thing as you. And that's going to create an echo chamber. So when you actually get to talk about what you really believe, it's only going to be with people who support you, right? So there's not going to be anything to bounce these ideas off of and counter them. It's just going to be, yeah, fuck this or fuck that, or I believe this and I believe that and whatever. And it's just going to compound and grow in strength, right?
Right.
And
It becomes a collective.
Exactly. But additionally, I think it's very unhealthy to tell people what you can or can't believe, because fundamentally, I believe you cannot kill an ideology with force. I fundamentally believe that to kill an ideology, it has to crumble from within. It has to dissolve itself, right? And my example for that is, look at the Nazis. People are like, well, you can get rid of ideologies with force. No, you can't. Do we still have Nazis in the world today? Yes, we do. Did we go to war and murder as many Nazis as possible? Yes. You know, did we say you can't be a Nazi? Yes. Do we tell people openly in the public, you can't do this? Yes. And yet they still exist, right? You can't kill ideology with force and oppression. I think the only way you see ideology falls apart is when the people who actually agree with that ideology stop believing in it, right? Because it's easy to say, you can't think this or you can't believe that. And someone who believes in it is going to say, well, fuck you. Of course I believe in it. Who are you to tell me what to think or what to believe or how to act, right? And I think it's in human nature that when someone pushes you, you want to push back, right? You have more incentive to buckle down and defend your ideas and defend your way of life instead of going, you said I can't do that. Well, now I'm going to consider, why would you say that? No, that's not what most people do. What most people do is they get defensive or aggressive, you know? So I think having the thought police roaming around is not good for the health of any society. I just don't think it works as a strategy, for one. But for another thing, I think it has lots of really negative, unintended consequences. You know, I think those are two things that I just can't live with, right? It just doesn't make any sense to me. If your goal is to get rid of an ideology, then you're going about it the wrong way. And that's all. That's how I feel about it. And people will say, well, we tried talking, we've been saying this for years and years and years. It's like, well, I hate to say this, but maybe the talking was not being done from the proper position. And I do believe that sometimes you need to speak from a point of power. I think that sometimes if you're oppressed, you can go on and on and on and try to have a discourse, but the person who's oppressing you is going to be like, well, I don't want to listen to whatever you have to say. That's true. That's a true thing. But I don't think that violence and force are going to stop those ideas from happening. What I think is going to happen is it's going to work like a pendulum, is that you have the oppressors on one side, and then the oppressed, overthrow them and try to destroy their ideology, and then they become the oppressors because the ideology hasn't gone away. It's just gone into the hands of a new group of people, right?
It becomes reactionary.
Yeah, it's like it's revenge. It's, well, you oppressed us, so we're going to oppress you. Look at the Bolsheviks. We're going to cut off all the heads of everyone who's doing well.
That's the crazy thing is, like, I can't believe how, like, people make the argument. It's like, oh, what we need is to, a lot of, like, it's this push for, like, these equity programs. And it's like, that's the only way we're going to get to equality. And, like, their logic being like, oh, like, we need to make up for the past wrongdoings to be able to catch them up. So their answer is we need more inequality, because like obviously you have to treat somebody else unequally to be able to make it equal. And I'm like, no, well, in theory, we could just create a system where you treat everybody equally, and you just have to make sure that that system works well for everybody. And that's the problem, is that like a current capitalist system isn't working for everybody effectively. However, that doesn't mean that we need to abandon everything. And that's where like the radical socialists will come in and be like, Marx, like we need to have a revolution. The proletariat shall rise up again. And it's just like, no, like that's not necessarily true either, because like it turns out we actually need a free market. And, the idea of being able to give out a loan, a IOU, a promise like, hey, I want to buy this car. I promise if I work hard, I'm going to pay it off. And now my life is better off. You have a car. Like capitalism does work. But there's also some elements of socialism where it's just like, hey, I understand it too. Like if we were able to scale things up on an idea, like last time when we were talking, I used the idea of a computer. Like you take a computer like Apple has, like I don't know how much it costs. How much do you think it costs to make a MacBook Pro, Mark?
I have no idea. Not nearly as much as they sell them for. That's
Right. So like
sure.
it costs $1,500 to sell them, but like if you take a socialist program where you scale it up, the production to be able to be like, oh well, we're going to sell this somewhat at cost, and now everybody can buy a MacBook for maybe around $400 or $500. Like that theoretically would be true. The problem is that within what we would see within socialism is that would remove incentive. It would remove incentive because in the capitalist model, there's this need for innovation. And so like there has to be some type of like happy medium. And that's really where the truth is. But the ideologues take over.
That's what you were talking about last time is if you instead of saying, okay, we're going to control the market, if the government just said, we're going to compete in the market, right?
Right.
That's a whole different deal. So if you take the computer model, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the government says, all right, well, computer is a pretty common technology nowadays. We know how to make a computer. It might not be the greatest computer, but it will be functional.
But we have the greatest minds who work here in the United States, and we could make a pretty darn good computer.
Right. But then basically you say the government will produce this at cost. And then you can use, people who work for the government, as in just any Joe Schmo off the street can go say, I'm going to go build the Americomputer or whatever it is,
right.
And then they, maybe their wage is a little bit lower, but also they could receive some sort of a benefit for that. And it would also provide a cheaper computer for everyone. So maybe, it doesn't say you can't sell MacBooks for $1,500. It says, well, if you can't afford a MacBook for $1,500, you can buy the everybody computer for $200, or the same with a car. Maybe you can't buy a Bentley or a Mercedes or whatever.
You could probably get Elon Musk's new electric car that we're going to mass produce here in the United States and scale that up so everybody can have their nice, things. And that's something that we could actually like work for, to be able to get
some sort of base model thing
producing again. But like as I said, like this ideal, like when our current capitalist structure is that we need to rely on the exploiter. We need to have cheap labor to keep the things that we want. And that we're not the only way there's only a couple ways that like history has fixed that problem. Like we have slavery, like that's one good way of doing it. But it turns out that that's very wrong. It created a lot of problems and we're currently still facing it. So we're going to get rid of that idea. Now we're doing the free market capitalist idea. We're going to be like, we're going to use emerging markets because it's cheaper for us to get stuff made in China than it is to make it here. So it makes a lot of sense. The problem is China's, getting too developed, and now their people want to do what we want to do, which is consume. We want to just have nice things. We don't want to work in factories because they want more labor. So like naturally, like the free market capitalists are looking towards different emerging markets around the world so they could invest in to be able to get, eventually replace China with somebody else. And it's just like, okay, I understand that logic. And if we're playing that game, that works. But here in the United States, like there's other ways of thinking about that problem. Like we know, like in the military, we could pay people for significantly cheaper than, like what the private sector costs, because like we know what the private sector costs because we have private contractors who make like hundred thousands, a lot of money, to being able to go fight wars. But here in the United States, like if we were to take like a military style model, where we were able to, create like a production brigade, where we're able to take like that idea with the computer and be like, hey, we know we know that if we want to have nice things, it costs money to make it. We can't afford to make nice things, and we can't do it. But if you come and work for us, we promise you, similar like to the military, we promise you that we'll be able to offer a good service for everybody. So everybody gets laptops for cheaper, for one, and we'll also set you up, where we'll be able to pay for your school. So not only are you getting real world experience, but we're going to be able to hook you up by going to the education, so you could be able to further yourself. And you could take the same model for like the production brigades or whatever and apply it to building housing. They could pay these people much less and be able to say like, hey, you're going to make an entire new housing facility out here in different states. Like the United States is huge. There's so many places that we can industrialize in. We can make entire new communities with this virtual job setup. Like Amazon, Apple, all of these jobs could virtually commit people to start working and create entirely new communities that are also sustainably, efficient for the economy by making them like solar, wind, and everything. Like we could honestly create that. That's in the near feasibility for our future. We just have to like think about everything differently,
Yeah. And I think the important thing there is that you're not removing competition. You're
right.
injecting competition.
And you're giving real hope for people, like
yeah.
if you're like the
not
average
to mention
person,
if you're a Joe Schmo person who's off the street and you just got out of high school and you just need income, and now there's all of these government, factories that are producing whatever thing,
you could go work for them, for you
to be like, I have
get real experience, and maybe they even house you. They give you free housing, some free food. Like you're not living bad. Like sure, you're not living in the mansion on the hill like all the top bourgeoisie capitalists, but like society is getting better. And I think a lot of the problems that we're really facing is like, dude, people work freaking hard in this country, man, put bread on the table for their family. And like our whole generation is very disappointed because they took out a lot of debt and they went to college, and now they're finding out like, oh man, apparently it is pretty competitive, because all of like this service-based economy that we currently have here in the United States apparently doesn't have that many jobs that pay that much. So what are you going to be, a banker, a lawyer, somebody else? But if you want to live here in California, for me, I know you're in Colorado, but in California, like taxes, property prices, everything, like it's almost impossible unless you, are take that job that's going to pay you a lot of money. So
that's another fucking problem. It's the goddamn taxes.
Right, and
you're taxing the shit out of the poor.
Do you want to get into taxes?
Taking away all their money.
Do you want to get into taxes too? Because I have I was thinking about an idea that I think might be worth exploring.
Yeah, I mean, go for it.
Currently, like our immigration system, like a lot of the resentment that we're seeing, when it comes to immigration is like mostly due to undocumented immigrants that they don't necessarily pay into taxes in the same way as documented citizens do. But if we were to reform the tax-based system to where maybe if you go into a store, all the taxes are being collected during your purchases, through sales taxes. So like instead of it being 10%, which is the current standard, maybe it would probably be around 40%. 50%, whatever. I don't know the number. I'm just throwing out ideas. You guys could figure it out if you're really interested. But the reason I say that is because like the way our current tax structure here in the United States, it's all based on a myth. Like most of the rich people pay taxes. If you make under a certain salary, you like, sure, it comes out of your paycheck. You think you're paying, but then you get the everything back at the end of the year. Most people don't really pay taxes. Like that's a dirty little secret. But at the same time, like here in California, like pretty much 50% of my money is going to taxes. So half of your money. So if you make $100,000, you're paying, you only make 50,000 of it. And like if people were more aware of like how much they're actually paying in taxes, they might get more involved in government, the economy, and everything. And
Well,
so
yeah,
like,
that's
I don't know,
because
like
the way the tax system is now is it's hiding your taxes from you. You never even
exactly.
see the money.
Exactly, and that's somewhat wrong, because like if we just look at like the founding, like our founding fathers, and like what they got mad at, like dude, like these guys got mad at like tea taxes. You know what I mean? Like they were about to they started a revolution over tea, and we're over here paying 50% of taxes. Like no wonder everybody's doing horrible. No wonder everybody's having a hard time. You're taking away literally half of their money. Like I like I I don't know. Like if we just
Well,
pay
that's the other thing is if you know, it's harder for people to get up in a ruckus about their taxes when it's happening like that because it's passive. It's passively
right.
taking your taxes, right? You're not actively giving away your money in taxes. It's just hiding it from you.
Right. And people like they make a moral argument. They're like, oh, Donald Trump doesn't pay his fair share in taxes, and people, like the rich need to pay their fair share. And it's just like, what do you think taxes do, bro? Like, do you think that like if by him not paying his fair share, which by the way he probably is paying more than you and most people, um, where's that money going? You think it just goes to a magical check to like give welfare, which of course it does, but we don't want that. We don't want to have a welfare system where it's just like you take from the rich and give to the poor. We want to create a system where the poor and the rich everybody could show up to work and they could have a good life here in the United States. Like we want to be able to get to the point where we're no longer worried about like having like the necessary things to like live in our current in the modern world. You know what I mean? Like I understand like nobody's starving here in the United States, where people are starving here in the United States, but not to the same degree as throughout the rest of the world. Like housing is an issue. All of these problems like we need to address. And I think that a lot of the real problems is that we think we made it as a nation. Like we see like, oh yes, there's rich people, but at the end of the day, like we're such a young country. Like we've only existed for not that long, and the internet was like founded like what 20 years ago. Like it this is so new, and like people, we don't have the perspective because like we have all of this modern technology. Like we have the computer. I could like we're talking to each other on the internet. Like you're in Colorado right now, I'm having a conversation with you. I could not do this when I was a child, and for it
Yeah.
nobody, like we're the first humans to ever be able to do this. And so like it really lacks like historical context on, because like we still have a lot to do. Like we need to produce more. We need to make more housing. We need to get people out of like these city centers and get them focusing on how to be good human beings, and not focusing on like, what am I going to eat? What new car am I going to drive? What's my house? What's my coat? What am I going to look like? I'm just trying to, be able to go out and have a fun time. Like we need to like get back into like this idea of becoming a virtuous society. And that's the only way I think we're really going to cure all of these problems that we have is restoring virtue. Because like if a virtue society is not racist, you know.
Right. Well, I think the thing there is that restoring virtue is, in its own way, almost like a mythical thing, right? Because what is virtue? That's like a whole philosophical debate. What is virtue? And to find out what virtue is requires a lot of self-reflection and reflection on the world, and less reflection on everybody else, right? That being said, this is something we talked about last time that I mentioned. I think that most people have an innate sense of justice, right? I think that most people can witness something and say, that
That
doesn't
needs to
sit
happen, or yeah.
that doesn't sit right with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they can't vocalize it. Maybe they can't articulate why it's wrong or what is wrong about it or why it doesn't sit with them, but they can feel it in their gut that there's something not right about it, right? And I think if we're trying to find virtue, you need to be able to articulate what it is that's wrong and why do you feel that what you just saw was wrong, or was it actually wrong, Or was there one part of it that made you feel that way? I think that we don't give ourselves enough credit for being able to innately kind of sense about the justice of a circumstance or an action or whatever. I think the problem is really that we just don't have the ability to articulate what we think is going on and why we think whatever we think about it. And, if you look at our society today in terms of virtue, there's not a lot of it. Some of the pillars of our society, really,
yeah, you're right.
like,
You're right.
Look at the pillars of our society, right? One of the pillars of our society is popular media, right? Hollywood and Netflix and, a lot of things like that.
Social media.
TV. And those are not virtuous enterprises. Yes, there's a movie here and a movie there and maybe a TV show here and there that have some sort of a good message or whatever. But a lot of it is really just eye candy, just some sort of like a filler for your time. It's not necessarily teaching you something. It's not necessarily helping you grow in some way. And a lot of people say, well, why do I have to grow all the time? Well, you don't. But I think it's important to understand that one of the things that people spend, at least in America, a lot of time on is not something that is developing you as a person. And a lot of the things that are pictured inside of, popular media are not virtuous. A lot of people are seeing some far out ideas about how to be a person in popular media.
Yeah,
I think that
have better role models.
Lust is also another pillar of our society now. And maybe it always has been to some extent. I think humans are innately pretty fucking horny, but I think that we are encouraging it. And it's not to say that I don't love sex. I sure do. But I also think if you look at the way that we're approaching, sex in terms of how we talk about it and how we engage in it, I think it's very sort of loosely controlled in terms of virtue, right?
Right.
And I think you could look at the dating apps, like hookup culture. I think it's good to be sex positive. Like, I don't think that you should be feeling any sort of shame or guilt about sex in any way. But I do think that it's important to recognize that sex has consequences emotionally, right? And, maybe you get somebody pregnant or, you become pregnant. Those are consequences.
And those are economic. Those are economic.
Those are economic consequences, but also there are emotional consequences, right? Like, it's easy to say, well, I'm detached and, all these things. But I think at a human level,
that society wants to behave as if they're detached, but in reality,
yeah, but I don't think we
can't necessarily do that.
And if you are, I feel like there's probably
a
little bit broken. If you can completely be detached while having some sort of physical intimacy, maybe you should stop having physical intimacy for a while and reflect on that, And then another pillar of our society is business, right? And there's something cool about that in that, we pull it together and we accomplish something. But at the same time, it's rife with greed, and selfishness.
Yeah, everybody wants the cars and the houses and the...
Yeah, so you have these large corporations that represent, not to get biblical, but how many of the 7 deadly sins are pillars of our society now? Lust, greed, sloth. How many people love to just sit around and do nothing instead of do anything? Mm-hmm. And I understand it's good to rest, but I think that living a life of sloth is not good for you mentally. It's not good for you.
It's physically not good for you too. If you're just sitting at home eating potato chips and not getting sunlight, you're going to fall into depression.
But I think sloth extends beyond just your physical body. I think there's also a sloth of the mind, which is why it's so, and I don't think it's on purpose. I think that there is this gluttony that we have developed in this world that we live in now that was not available to us before, right? Gluttony used to be this consumption of food. But I think gluttony is really just consumption. And what do we do now more than ever? We consume media, social media, and TV, right? Because it's so accessible. Today in America, your access to the internet grants you, if you have access to the internet, which most people in America do, free Wi-Fi is in a lot of places. If you don't have access to the internet in America today, I would say that you are being crippled in society the same way you would if you didn't have access to running water or you didn't have access to electricity. I think that it has become such an important part of our society now that you not having access to the internet will cripple you in some way. But I also
especially
think that
right now, especially
yeah,
right now with being locked
your
in.
access to the internet allows you to consume so much with so little effort. It stops you from thinking about things, right? Because it's much easier to just consume than to process, right? It's easy to just scroll through a feed and consume, and not process any of it. And I think that's just another form of gluttony is I'm just going to sit, I'm going to binge watch Netflix. And we've all done it. I've done it. Everyone does it. But that's the whole thing about gluttony is that it's not that you're some bad person. It's that there is this thing that gives you some sort of a feeling that you want to replicate. And you're going to keep doing that.
It could be a coping mechanism too. It could be a coping mechanism.
Yeah, it could.
Yeah.
And how many people are okay with being left alone with their thoughts? You know,
I don't know. I can't generalize, but I mean, like I know that like we're going through something much deeper in a larger society. Like I've talked to like friends, and a lot of people are going through stuff. Like they secretly talk about how they're kind of over the dating apps. They're kind of want something more meaningful in life, and they know that like our current structure and society is on going down the wrong direction. And maybe the younger generations might be able to get it correct. I think we're waking up. I think it's a good thing that we did experience this, because we do live in like the most free and liberal society in the world. But I think that the problem with that is that these liberties get pushed to the logical extreme. And what happens, like we take advantage of certain things. So like now, porn is like a huge problem, for in the United States. Social media, like sometimes people are just addicted to this. They spend too much time on it. It affects them. It's definitely not healthy. And I know that like just looking at some of the conversations that I see on Facebook, and I know that something is happening because we're not treating each other as human beings. We're treating each other as the other, as if you're the problem. And that actually comes up. They explicitly do say that, like, oh, if you don't understand this, then like you're the problem. But then they can't explain or articulate themselves like, well, what do you mean like you're the problem? And it's just like, I think like the real problem here is humanity itself is the problem.
Well, and a lack of ability to communicate.
Yeah, and that like we are intellectually weak, even though that a lot of people went to college, and I think that that's a huge problem is because like we have a society who thinks like that we're educated, but yet we're clearly not. We're clearly not. If we can't
both went to Columbia, and how many people do we both know that can't communicate at all?
Right. Yeah. That's why. I mean, like just to point that out, like that's one of the reasons we're having like this podcast is because like like I thought like when I got to Columbia, like I'm gonna be like, oh man, this is like the world's smartest people, like the smartest people in the world. Obviously, we're going to be able to solve all the problems and be able to take these problems seriously. And then I got there, and it was just like nothing but just partisan politics. And I was just like, nobody cares. Nobody cares. Like nobody's searching for a higher objective truth. And I'm going to just go out on a limb here and say, if it's not happening at Columbia, it's not happening anywhere. And I said it. I hope I don't get attacked for it. And I mean, like, hopefully I'm representing Columbia well.
It's happening on onesie-twosie levels.
Well, I mean,
it's not happening organizationally.
Exactly, organizationally, which is what I would have hoped. I would have hoped and said like, oh, the university has, to be fair, the university has come out and they said like we do stand with free speech, and like that's great, but like that's not what I was looking for. I was looking for like not just free speech, because like I think that that's obvious. It should be obvious why we need free speech. I am talking about like let's start from humble beginnings and know like once we enter this room, like we know that we both have the best of intentions and we're just trying to pursue the higher truth, no matter what is said. Like, I'm not attacking you as an individual. We're both just trying to come with the most logical conclusion to be able to fix the problems in our society. And there, I mean, I believe that there's a, you know, objective truth on the best way we had to order things and be able to, you know, put forth policy. But that didn't exist, you know, from my experience. And I would hope that would happen to be able to fix what we're currently going on today, because I think, you know, like the universities are like, those are the people who have the most amount of time to think and be able to come up with you know, pragmatic solutions for everything. And so if it can't happen there, then I don't know where. Maybe at a think tank, but last I checked, like most think tanks are also, you know, just very partisan, whether it's, you know, a libertarian, Republican, Democrat think tank. You know, like they're only concluded with their own narrative. What I would like to see is, you know, maybe a Republican think tank teaming up with a Democratic think tank, and when they know, when you guys enter the debate room, I think you're a good person, you think I'm a good person, and let's just find out where we disagree and come to a point where we could be like, oh, well, we both disagree on something. Like, let's take the border wall, maybe, for instance, without getting too political on that. Be like, okay, well, I disagree on this. Well, what can we do? We want, you know, people want to have a more secure border. How much does it cost? And come up with like a real solution, and not just being like, oh, you're racist if you want a border, or you're a communist if you want free open borders. And it's just like, that's such a stupid conversation. And that's what we're having.
It doesn't progress anything.
It doesn't progress anything. And that's why, like, I mean, like, call me crazy. I feel like most people shouldn't be talking about politics at all, or any of these problems, because like they're not taking the problem seriously. You know, I would feel to some extent like we're trying to take the problem seriously, but like something has to change, and it has to be a change from within. And we have to, you know, like assume that like everybody's has the best intentions. And like the reason might be questioning you is not because I'm a horrible individual and I'm, you know, secretly something that, you know, evil. No, that's not it. It's because we are searching for the highest truth. And
right.
That's the most important thing. Like, what else is worth pursuing? If you can't pursue the truth, then what is worth pursuing? You know, like,
well, I don't think most people want to pursue the truth. I think most people just want to pursue whatever makes them comfortable.
To win. They want to win.
Most they want to win, and they want to be comfortable, you know? And I think that having somebody question you and question your beliefs makes most people uncomfortable. It makes them uncomfortable, and it adds a little like annoyance in their life, you know, because now they have to deal with somebody questioning them. And I think on some level, it also makes them, for a brief moment, question themselves. Maybe not about whatever you said, but it makes them have to have this reflective moment before they react, you know. And I just think it's a shame, really, that's how it is. I think you're probably onto something. If we could see our politicians go in to talk about a problem together, and maybe they have the leader of whatever group is upset. You know, for example, we look at today, right? If we had, you know, several leaders in the Black Lives Matter movement able to sit down in a room with our politicians and have an open discussion where people are respecting each other, right? That the protesters are respecting the politicians and the politicians are respecting the protesters. They enter the room thinking, we all are in this together. We're all trying to achieve the same goals. It's how we achieve them that we're going to try and discuss, and make that public. Make it totally public. Broadcast it on the internet, not just on TV, because for one thing, nobody in the younger generation, I think, really has a TV. They have the internet, and that's how they consume media. So make these things public for everyone. Let the discussion happen, and then see where it goes. But
Right.
at a core, people need to walk into the room assuming we all want to achieve this goal together. And if someone questions me, it's because they want to understand why I think what I think.
Yeah.
And
And
which,
and when I
a lot of people don't
understand
do
what
that.
you think, I'd be like, oh, it finally clicked. Now I get why you're doing this. And maybe I'm gonna be like, oh, have you ever thought about doing this on top of that? You might even be able to make it better. But if you can't tell your logic, then like by definition, like you must not be that smart, you know what I mean? Like because you can't communicate your ideas effectively to be able to convince somebody else. And like our current liberal democracy kind of requires like this type of effort to be able to, to happen if we want liberal democracy to
Well, it's
continue
very
to
intellectually
exist.
rigorous.
Yeah, it is very intellectually rigorous, and that's the type of responsibility that like our society has. Like remember, like the United States was made for a moral and just people, and I'm not insinuating that we are no longer moral and just, because whether you're on the left or the right side of the political aisle, like you guys are both going to think opposite of other. I'm assuming everybody thinks bad of like their other political party, and I consider that to be a failure because like we are the human race. Like the United States, like if we fail, like this is, I honestly think this is the last like hope for humanity, because if we fail and this is slowly becoming a racial war, then we're going to fragment again in society, and we're going to have like a repeat of like the ideas in the Bible of like the Tower of Babel. Like we create this huge empire of the United States, and it's going to crumble from within because we tried reaching too high, and we need to be more humble. We need to, you know, that's really about it. And we need to acknowledge what we don't know. And I know that I don't know a lot because there's so much crap happening right now. Like I've literally been covering these stories pretty much nonstop, and I can't keep up. If I can't keep up, then that means I know for a fact the average person who's just checking on their phone for 2 seconds between their work can't keep up. But yet those people have an opinion, and those people piss people off online, and it causes more resentment. And so I think the most responsible thing to do would be like to not talk about politics. And I know that everybody wants to talk about it because like some horrible things happen in the Black community, and we're seeing these riots, and a lot of stuff is happening. But I don't think the solution is to cause riots where you're causing more economic damage to our already damaged economy. You're making everybody's lives economically and objectively worse by by ruining your community. Because like either way, we're going to have to fix that up. And so I think like once you make you confirm that it's okay to be violent and destroy property, like that's flawed logic already. Like we don't
Well,
get
I
to do
think there's
that.
most
You
people
know what I
are
mean?
not. I don't think there's very many people who are advocating for that. And I think
No,
within like
I
Black Lives Matter,
understand.
that's people are not advocating. I think that's opportunists taking advantage of the opportunity. I think that's what the most of it is. But I think, in terms of not talking about things, I don't think that necessarily the solution is not to talk about it. I think the solution is not to
Is to
yell
be
about it.
to be more careful, and to be like to
The,
acknowledge that hey, we're both trying to solve this, and we honestly we really don't know what we're doing how to communicate effectively.
well, that's the
Because
thing, right? Is a lot of people are not talking. What they're doing is asserting. They're
mm-hmm.
yelling. They're just trying to yell loud enough that
And
their
say
idea
listen,
sticks,
stick,
right?
yeah.
Which is not talking. Talking requires that you listen to whoever you're talking to. That's discourse, which is not what happens. And if if you're not willing to have discourse, then yeah, maybe you shouldn't be talking about it. And that's a hard argument to make, I think, because you can extend that and say, look, you let's put it this way, right? People will say that racism is not a discussion, it's just objectively wrong. And I agree. I don't like racism. I think it's horrible. But I also think that yelling and screaming at the racists will not make them go away and will not keep them from being racist anymore.
Right.
And I also think that a lot of groups of people like that are very easily aggravated and more prone to aggression than you would like. Right. And if you're trying to solve the problem, incensing a group of, you know, individuals who are prone to aggression is probably not, you know, a great way to go.
Right.
But that requires that you have hard discussions. Really awful, uncomfortable, lengthy, painful discussions.
Yeah. And here's something that's worth questioning is, like, you know, I really do think that everybody's over, you know, just using the term racist too liberally. And like, I think it is worth questioning, like, is it possible that the cop who killed George Floyd, like, obviously, you know, what he did was wrong, and I don't approve of it, but is it possible that he is a racist, or maybe he is just a shitty human being, you know, which are significantly different things, because, you know, there's a lot of bad people in the world and people do fuck up. So, and I'm not saying that what he did was a fuck up, you know, like where he was a good cop always, and he had this one incident, like, obviously he left his knee on his neck for 9 minutes. That's very significant, you know, and he should reap the repercussions of his actions. You know, that is justice, because he would, you know, he was wrong. It was an individual case of justice where he murdered that man, even when he spoke up that he couldn't breathe. But does that make him a racist because the victim was black? I don't think that it's necessarily obvious that is a case of racism. You know, it is possible that maybe he is just not a good individual. You know, and that is something worth at least considering, because not everything is racist. There are just bad people in the world in general.
Well, I mean, that kind of goes into there's a discussion that lots of liberal Democrats are just as racist as conservative Republicans. They're just doing it in a different way. They're doing it in a passive, quiet way. And I think that there is probably a lot of that, right? And I think it's easier for people to label aggressive acts against people of color as racist than it is for them to label things like the projects as racist, which they are, which was something put in by liberal Democrats, right? The projects are racist as fuck. That was literally just trying to keep poor people of color away from white people who had money. And it was framed as this, oh, well, don't worry, here's this low-income housing area just for you. It's to help you. But that was not at all what it was about. And look at how the projects are now. You know, anywhere you go, it's hard life. And that's on purpose, right? Racism comes in many forms. It comes in lots of different shapes and sizes. But I do think it's very important to understand what is actually racist and when is somebody a racist. You know, because if you just label everything, any act against a person of color as racist,
then you're just the boy who cried wolf.
No, it's just kind of like
racist. It just becomes
it's
tokenism. Less meaningful.
Yeah, it's kind of tokenism, because what you're doing is saying, oh, well, he attacked a black person, therefore he is a racist, when maybe that person didn't see them as a person of color. He just saw him as a victim, you know?
Or, yeah.
He saw him as, I could attack this person, or, you know, I could rip this person off, or whatever they saw. They didn't see the color of the skin. They're just an asshole, period. Mm-hmm. But the person who's saying, oh, well, that's because you're a racist. Well, is that really it? And
assholes do exist.
Have you evaluated yourself, you know? Yeah, I don't know. It's very complicated. I don't think there's really any easy solution or answer here.
No, there's no easy solution. But
well, there is an easy answer, and the easy answer is to don't think about it and just label everything. You know, shoot from the hip. It's easy, but I also don't think it's going to be conducive to, you know, a society that any of us want to live in. Right. You know, instant judgment, instant gratification, I think are rife with opportunity for failure, you know, and disappointment.
Yeah, I don't know. But I think that's that says it up. I think that that's some good talking points, for people to, think about, how they're properly using the term racist. If you're having a conversation with another person, you might want to have them define their terms for racist, because, racism means a lot of different things for a lot of different people. Like I know, like one of the interpretations of like the more like postmodernist types would put forward is that, Black people can't be racist because they don't have any access to power. Only people who are in a position of power could be racist. And I think that that's a very flawed definition of racism, but it's one that some people in society do adopt. And so you need to know who you're talking to and know what they actually believe by when they say racism. And then I guess like that goes into the idea of like systematic racism. What does it mean to be systematically racist? Well, I recently watched like a video at the Harvard Kennedy School. It's their school of government, and they had some activists come on and explaining how the current history. And I'm taking this problem seriously. I'm trying to figure out some like real solutions, and I don't want the United States to go down the wrong path. And so like her interpretation for systematic racism is that like obviously she points to the past and be like, well, our founding fathers were slavery, the 1960s Jim Crow, and segregation, and then now it's a continuation with the recent killings. And as I said, like it's not necessarily obvious that that's happening, but she did make, to give her credit, she did make a good point, and it's like whether or not whether that cop was racist or not, that the current system produced that cop. The current system created, it's still happening to Black bodies. And I was like, wow, that's, that is an interesting way of looking at it. And so like, I understand like the Black community is fed up and they want a recommitment in some type of way to be able to fix these problems, because I don't want that happening to anybody. And I think most people would agree on that. But when she was referring to systematic racism, she ties it to the capitalist system. She says that, well, there's an economic incentive, for capitalists or in our capitalist system to target Black people because of our, and the evidence that she uses for that is our prison system, that we have for-profit prisons, so it's in their incentive to do that. The problem with, I think that her logic is that people are only going to go to prison on a case-by-case basis. So like if you're going to suggest that people are going to prison in large based off of economic incentive, I don't see any evidence for that, because you would have to see, like people are still committing crime. Like people don't go to prison. I mean, obviously like there's the like exception to the rule, but by and large, like you go to jail for committing a crime. And so like this problem is big. Like there is crime does happen. So,
well,
but
I mean that I think it seems to me that maybe there is not an economic incentive for the prisons specifically, because they are not choosing who gets sent into the prisons. But I also think that there's a lot of statistics showing that prisons are overwhelmingly filled with people of color instead of white people.
Which is true. It's true.
Yeah, and I think that is a result of the system that we live in, and the fact, for example, low-income neighborhoods, it's failures of the system as a whole. And right. I think it's morally wrong to have a business that profits off of the confinement, the imprisonment of another person. I think that's morally wrong. I understand the need for prisons, but I also think that it's fucked up that we can make that a for-profit industry. I think that that's essentially slavery. It's you making a profit off of controlling the movement of another person, know? And I think that that's just morally wrong. I think if we're going to have prisons, they should not be for profit. Period.
I don't know enough to be able to say like whether or not they are for profit, because like there are like public-private partnerships where it could be somewhat of a nonprofit. I think that her point is just that like private companies run these institutions. It's not federal dollar, the government owning it.
Well, that is entirely true. And they get money from the government per head. And I
Right.
think that that's wrong, because then that prison has an incentive to make sure
Right.
none of its inmates go out. They have an incentive to overfill the prison. They have an incentive to bring in a parole board and have the
You,
parole board say, no, fuck you, you're staying in jail,
you know, you,
because it makes us money.
mhm. You know what I was thinking? This is a kind of like somewhat of a radical, dreamy idea, but I think it, just worth thinking about is like whatever, like, there's a lot of people in prison here in the United States, and I think that's messed up to like spend your whole life behind bars. Like that's honestly fucked up. I believe in like the idea of redemption. I think it's necessary for a society to be able to redeem and come back and make it. And that, even if you're, somewhat of a murderer, murderers could still get their lives together. Obviously it's got to be on a case by case scenario. But like, what if you could take like a city, for instance, like create a city like out in the middle of the desert, where there's like, or not in the middle of the desert, but like in a nice place, give them like a decent living where you actually create housing, you actually created a local economy where you could be able to produce stuff, be able to make them work and earn the give back to the larger American community, but also being like a prison style where it's blocked in to where you learn how to live in this community long enough and you prove yourself, and we're going to let you back into normal society again.
Right. Like a training grounds, kind of.
Yeah, I think that would be really cool, and worth doing. And
There is a prison like that, actually.
really,
It's in some Scandinavian. All these like crazy utopian like things are all in Scandinavia for some reason, and they all work out great there. I don't know what it is about being in Scandinavia. I don't know what, but there is a prison there that I read a whole article about, and I did some research on, and got in contact with somebody from the prison to ask them some questions. And yeah, no, it's basically an open style village, and you just can't leave the village.
yeah, that'd be cool.
And
Like, and you could even have like maybe like they could even order stuff on Amazon, just limited stuff. That would be freaking cool. And that means there's more consumption happening in the United States. It means that companies would be better off. There's more productive members of society. I think that would increase everybody's overall well-being in the United States.
yeah, I
Just
mean,
by
I think
little
redemption is
little tiny.
definitely important. I think it's
Yeah.
important to think about that people can recover from their mistakes, and I think, yeah, there's a lot of things that maybe are irredeemable. But I also believe, whether this is true or not, I believe that most crime stems from lack of education, horrible life circumstances, or trauma, or all three.
Mm.
I don't
And
think most
if
people.
you grow up in the projects, you probably are likely to experience all three of those.
Yeah, exactly, right. And that's not fair. It's fucked
Yeah,
up that
it's
you
not
got
fair.
dealt a shit hand and now you have to be a prisoner. That's
And and
bullshit.
and see, like the problem, well, that what we're getting at right here is like this is where the free market types would be like, yes, it is not fair. Like but like it's life is not fair, and like that's, yeah, like I understand where they're coming from, but we shouldn't
That's a
necessarily
cop out.
no, but we shouldn't necessarily accept that, because like we know like when wealth inequality gets too wide, like societies crumble, like nations exist, empires fall. Like this is actually mentioned even in the Bible, like going all the way back to like the prophetic scriptures. Like it tells about like when societies get too indebted and they become morally corrupt, similar to what we are here in the United States. And I'm not like turning this into like a preaching lesson. I'm just saying like this problem has always existed, and like we're facing it now. How are we going to react? Like history would show that we're probably going to crumble, but at the same time, like we have a lot of potential to reverse this trend, and
Well, I think
we
that
just need to
is.
be wise
Are we
about
going
it.
to learn from the lesson and do something different, or are we just going to keep trudging along doing the same goddamn thing? Because if we
If
keep
we're,
trudging along doing the same thing, of
uh,
course it's going to fail.
I mean, to answer that question, I guess the way I would put it is, if we're putting progressive policy where we're just pursuing progress for progress's sake, just without thinking, like just putting it like Black Lives Matter, just put in these policies or requests for to defund the police, and then what, the next day there's already police departments around the world or around the United States saying like, okay, we're going to defund our police force, and we're looking into it. We're looking into all that. I don't think that that's the solution. I think the real solution is saying, okay, now's the time, guys. Our parents weren't responsible. Our grandparents weren't responsible, but we're going to be responsible. We're going to come in and have like a convention, and we're not going to leave until we figure this out. This is our responsibility. Like, we got to figure this out. And, you know, if we don't do that, you know, like, we are going to see probably a rise in totalitarianism, whether that's on the left or the right side of the political spectrum. Like, I can't tell you, but I do know that, like, it starts in here, it starts in us. And, you know, this is our responsibility. It's not pointing like, you're the problem. It's like, no, we are the problem. All of us, you know.
Yeah.
We all have the
Yeah.
capacity to be good, and we all have the capacity to be bad. And, you know, and yeah, I would even say, like, if you're calling somebody the problem without you actively trying to tell them why they are the problem and trying to convince them, and change their mind, because I think people are willing to change their mind if you just are patient and you both start on the same playing field, that, like, hey, we both want the same thing, guy, you know.
Well, I think that the reason that doesn't happen very much is because to be on the same, you know, playing field and to change someone's mind, you have to first understand that person, right? And I don't think a lot of people want to understand other people. They just want to be understood, you know, or they want people to behave or act or think a certain way. And in order to actually accomplish that, you need to do the work to understand that person, right? And that takes time. It takes time. And it also takes you learning how to be quiet and listen, even if this person is fucked up, horrible person, to be quiet and listen to what they have to say so that you can understand them. Because how are you going to communicate with someone you don't understand where they're coming from or how they operate, you know, or how they think? The best way to change someone's mind about something is to understand how they think. Because then once you understand how they think, you can construct an argument that they will actually understand and be able to digest.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Nope, and obviously, you know, that doesn't account for, you know, just arrogance and ignorance, but, you know, I think that it's a step in the right direction that, you know, we should all be trying to take.
Yeah. Well, with that, I think we have to call it a wrap. And, you know, maybe we'll see what happens. You know. All right. Yeah. See you guys next week.